Good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started here. So welcome to the March 30th session of our course. If we are disconnected for more than 10 minutes, please check back with Canvas later in the day for information we would have covered during this lecture today. Okay, I see some of you have already jumped to it. At this time, let's do our attendance check-in. At this time, please type present for your attendance in chat. If you did not sign in with your full name, be sure to include it in the message. I'll try to remind myself to go through that little check-in a little bit later before we end today, in case someone shows up a little bit later. Okay, what we've been doing so far during this semester is doing a revisit of our last session. But during our last session, we actually had an exam, and so I want to go over that real quickly with you at this time. So our last unit test was on exam number 3. So we're moving into exam unit number 4 today. We have only a few more units left, which I'll talk about after this slide. So last unit test, exam number 3, the average score was 93. So we did see a bump up relative to the midterm assessment that equates to an A in this particular class. Our standard deviation is somewhat tight, so everyone was somewhere around the same area. The average test time, again, here took about 35 minutes and 29 seconds. So we are well under the 90 minutes that I give you for your assessment, and you seem to comfortably get through this just fine. The test takers, there are 20 of you who logged in and took the test during this outing. Now, what I use this time for is to give you a little background about how you performed overall and collectively on the test, but also I want to try to clarify a few items as well. Here's some item clarifications. What this basically means is that people got this to 70% accuracy or less. So that to me says, I just want to clarify to make sure we understand what the item was about. So basically, I want to clarify the idea of sense of touch. This is during our sensation and perception section of the test. Sense of touch is comprised of some basic sensations. And those basic sensations are pressure, pain, warmth, and cold. So that's what we have the ability to sense, those basic sensations. And everything that we feel when we go to our scan and touch and all this type of stuff is a combination of those things. For example, we know if you have pressure and cold, we experience that as wet. So whatever you can sense via touch is going to be comprised of these basic sensations. All right, the other item deals with memory or encoding. Just wanted to clarify, when we mean encoding, it refers to getting information into memory. So we first have to encode it so that we then can store it. So then later we may retrieve it. So encoding is just getting the information into memory. And then finally, the last item that we wanted some clarification on was classical conditioning and operant conditioning when it comes to associations. Classical conditioning is learning to associate two stimuli together. So it's two stimuli. Now remember, in classical conditioning, we're very passive. We don't have to do anything. The stimuli are just presented to us, and how that stimuli is presented to us will make us be able to become conditioned. So we condition by putting together a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus enough times that that neutral stimulus will become a conditioned stimulus. So it is the association of two stimuli that is the root of classical conditioning. When it comes to operant conditioning, we learn to associate a behavior or response with a consequence. So a kid cuts his little sister's hair or ponytail, and the response or the consequence for that is going to be what they learn. So if I do this, this is going to happen to me. If I do that, that's going to happen to me. It's that learning between the organism's behavior and the consequences of that behavior, which is key in operant conditioning. All right, cool. Now, the other thing I want to make sure we understand is the next few modules that we're going to be going through, the next few units, we only have a few left. We have Unit 4, which we are starting today with the chapter 10 on motivation and emotion. Then in Unit 5, we'll be looking at personality and psychological disorders. And then the final unit will be Unit 6, looking at therapy and applied psychology. For the most part, we'll see that the remaining units that we'll cover will focus on 2 chapters only. Now, there'll probably be a little bit more stuff to focus on Unit 6, where we have therapy and applied psychology. Right now, we have work of IO psychology, but I'll probably record a lecture that you guys can look at as well for forensic psychologists. Some of you may be interested in that as well. Okay, before we get started, are there any questions? I do know that you have an assignment coming up real soon. It's in this particular unit, actually, week 11. April 11th or 12th or so, you should be able to submit your current event paper. So I've did receive a few questions about that recently, so I know people are working on that. I think I even have one that has already been submitted. So if you do have some questions, please email me or spend time to think of a question before we get out of here. I might be able to address them for you. Okay, before I get started, are there any questions or comments or statements you want to make before we begin Chapter 10, Motivation and Demotion?
I do have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
In regarding to the puzzles that are due, I saw that we have one for this chapter that actually has a due date. Some of the other ones, are they past due or just due as the course proceeds?
Due as the course proceeds, I mean, for the most part, I've been rather lax with you guys to an extent, in that I don't pile on a bunch of work like I do for my other courses, because we do have our lecture, and this is your opportunity to ask questions and things of that nature. First, they won't kill you when it comes to the grade if you don't perform well, but it's you can get them right, meaning that you have unlimited opportunities for them. So if there are some that don't have a due date, those are probably the ones that were sort of like put after we've already gone past a particular chapter. That's most likely the situation. Is that correct? Like chapter 6, maybe?
Yes. I had
Okay.
kind of noticed them at the very end of the syllabus, which is why I wasn't sure, like, if they were past due and I missed them.
No, you did not. You did not. You did not. Usually I have these things already set up, but I realized I didn't do it yet. I want to see how things are going to go. This is just another opportunity for you guys to practice, even though for the most part, depending on your performance, you guys are doing relatively well at this time. So again, I'll see how they go to see if you guys are able to do these puzzles without too much stress, but don't worry about them too much. I think you guys will be able to handle them no problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, anyone else? Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. Someone just mentioned up about the puzzles. Again, there are a few puzzles there for you. We do have one for chapter 10, which covers motivation and emotion, which we'll be talking about today as well as in our next session. So let's go ahead and get started then. So motivation. Motivation, we'll be looking at theories of motivation, drives, arousal, hierarchy of motives. Some motivations that we'll look at in depth are going to be hunger, belonging, as well as achievement. And then our next session, when we get together, we'll be focusing on emotion, the roles of arousal, behavior, and cognition and emotion, embodied emotion, what goes on in the body doing when we're experiencing certain emotions, expressed and experienced emotion, and then the influence of culture and gender on emotions. We'll see there are some differences based on gender and culture about how we experience and or display emotions, and we'll talk more about that in our next session. So today we focus on motivation. We'll start off by looking at theories of motivation. So basic motivation concepts, hunger and belonging. We're going to look at some models of motivation, looking at instincts in evolutionary psychology, drives in the synthesis, seeking optimal arousal levels, and then hierarchy of motives, which I'm sure we've talked about a time or two already. So first, let's talk about what this thing is. What is motivation? Motivation is a need or a desire that energizes behavior and directs it towards a goal. And we all have different levels of motivation. For example, let's say you have to go physically to a class. Let's say it's a 8 o'clock in the morning class. And let's say the weather is crappy outside. It's drizzling really cold. It's windy. It's just totally inhospitable weather out there, and you are a little bit tired from the previous evening, you may not have enough energy or motivation to get up to go to the 8 o'clock in the morning class, where some people have no problem doing that. So motivation does vary from person to person, but what it comes down to, it is that need or desire that energizes us, gives us energy, and directs our behavior toward a particular type of goal. Now, what we see here, some of you may remember, especially those of you who are a little bit older, may remember this scenario. Aaron Ralston found the motivation to cut off his own arm when he was trapped on a cliff in Utah in 2003. He went out for some rock climbing, I believe, or something of that nature, hiking, and wound up getting stuck. And he realized that if he did not get away from getting stuck, okay, he was going to die. But the problem was his arm. His arm was preventing him from doing that. So he had to make a decision. Now, during this time frame, he would go in and out of consciousness. He would fall asleep, and he reports at one point that he had a dream. He had a dream of a one-armed man picking up a little boy. Now, he didn't have any kids at the time, as I understand, and so he saw that as something to sort of motivate him to do something about it. So what motivated him to do this? The idea of hunger, probably, the drive to survive, the drive to reproduce, to have a family, to live a life a little bit more than the life that he'd already lived. So he found the energy and the perseverance to use a knife that he had available to him to saw through his skin, his flesh, and his bones in order to escape and survive. Many of us would probably have died with next to those rocks. The idea is that it does take a certain degree of motivation to be able to maim oneself, even if it's a life or death scenario. I seriously doubt I would have had the capability to do what he did. Uh, if you think you would have had the capability to do what he did, great, more power to you. I just don't know if I could. I don't know if it came down to it. Maybe I'd be like him. Maybe I wouldn't. But that really describes to us in a very personal way what motivation is, how powerful motivations can drive somebody to do some very miraculous types of things. Now, looking at several perspectives of motivation, there are different ways of thinking and the way of motivation works, all of which relate to the push of biological processes and the pull of cultural and social forces and ideals that motivate us, to energize us and direct us towards certain things. So we'll be looking at instinct theory, which is also an evolutionary perspective. We'll look at drive reduction theory, arousal optimization theory, and then, of course, the hierarchy of needs that sort of describe to us what goes on as we become motivated to perform certain acts or behaviors. First, let's look at instincts. Do instincts direct human behavior? Well, first, what is an instinct? An instinct is a fixed, rigid, and predictable pattern of behavior that is not acquired by learning and is likely to be rooted in genes and the body. So this is something that we sort of come pre-programmed with. Normally, when we think about something that is fixed and rigid that we don't have to learn, we're probably going to be thinking more about reflexes, which we talked about previously. These are things that aid in our survival, and that's why we still have these reflexes, because the ones who didn't have those particular reflexes, they were the ones who are more likely to die out. Again, we see that evolutionary type of thing there. Now, when it comes to a animal, a lower animal than ourselves, for example, the bird that we see imaged on the right here, they are driven instinctually to build a nest. They are programmed to do it. So it's like, I must build nests now, that type of thing. For us, for human beings, we don't have such powerful instincts that this bird does. We have a more generalized, general instinct, for example, which may reveal itself, quote, nesting, unquote. Our nesting behavior would be something to buy and repair a home because this young couple is now considering of starting a family. Now, for most of us, some of this type of stuff is going to be based on a social clock that we mentioned previously. We all have a social clock. We go through school, we go through high school, we go through college, we get a job, we get married, we start a family. All the whole type of thing is part of our social clock. So for us, these instincts are not so powerful that they're going to drive us as much as it may drive other animals. So other species have genetically programmed instincts that lead to, quote, motivating their actions. Okay. And so do humans? Well, human babies show certain reflexes, but in general, our behavior is less prescribed by genetics than other animals, meaning that other animals are more likely to stay true to their instincts, the things which motivate their actions and their behaviors. For us, a little bit less so. So we don't have these instincts that dictate how we're going to behave. And if we did have them, we are smart enough to try to ignore them. We do things all the time which are contrary to us being healthy. Okay, we know that most animals are going to do things that will make them live longer and be healthier, okay, and survive the way they're sort of programmed to, but not necessarily the case for humans. So we may have these general patterns of behavior which can be explained as emerging through natural selection. All right, basically, again, remember, natural selection basically saying the nature of the environment in which you live may select some people as being more successful than others, meaning that they have characteristics that are part of their body, their makeup, or their psyche or behavior that makes those individuals more likely to live than those other individuals. And so those other individuals are not going to be as fruitful in the gene pool, meaning having as many offspring as the ones who are more successful. And that's how natural selection works. And so the idea we see that more than anything having a large play in our behavior than anything else, but we don't have this major control of instincts that we see in lower animals. Okay, so instinct theory has given a way to evolutionary theory in explaining human behavior. So we don't have instincts, but evolution, things like natural selection, probably do play a role. At one point, I think in a previous lecture, we talked about natural selection and how something that may drive mating behavior, meaning what males look for, what females look for. They are different based on evolutionary theory and things like natural selection, trying to spread genes or have healthy babies. So the evolutionary perspective gives us one view as to how it is that we are motivated to do something. Now we have drive reduction. First, a drive is an aroused, tense state related to a physical need such as hunger or thirst. So if you did not eat dinner last night, you haven't eaten breakfast this morning, and you have yet to eat lunch, you may be feeling a little bit of hunger. That tension, that feeling of uncomfortableness that you may be experiencing now or may have experienced in the past, that is what we refer to as a drive. That's something that we particularly don't like so much. All right. It's sort of like an unpleasant stimuli that's present within us. So, drive reduction theory refers to the idea that humans are motivated to reduce these drives because we don't like them. They make us feel uncomfortable. So we're motivated to reduce these drives, such as eating to reduce the feeling of hunger. We eat to get rid of that drive of hunger. And when we do that, when we eat and we feel satiated, we are okay. This restores us to homeostasis, a steady or balanced internal state. We're not hungry anymore. We're balanced, okay? So we're not starving. We're not hungry. We're not overfull. We're in balance. So that's what we're looking for, that level of homeostasis. So a drive could be anything, usually something physiological that we need to take care of because our body requires it. And the ones that really think of those authors are going to be things like food and water. So we have a need for food or water that causes within us this state or this drive, again, a tense state related to a physical need, okay? And then it motivates our behavior, drive reducing behaviors of eating and drinking is what it comes down to. Now, this should also make you remember too, in a previous unit, the last unit we just got through taking our exam on, about learning. When we have some negative type of unpleasant situation going on, and there's a behavior that we can do that will make that behavior go away, negative, okay, that behavior, that stuff to go away is going to be reinforced, ergo negative reinforcement. So we see that learning is at play here too. So every time you were in the situation where you didn't eat breakfast, you didn't eat lunch, it's getting late in the afternoon and you're really hungry, you see the golden arches, that's McDonald's, you go to it and it satisfies your need. Then it's going to be reinforced in the future. Next time you're in that same scenario, you're probably more likely to do that again, negative reinforcement. So that's drive reduction. The other motivating thing that we see is optimum arousal, okay? Think about arousal in this sense, about curiosity, as we can see with these monkeys here. Some behaviors seem to be driven by a need either to increase or decrease our physiological arousal. Okay, it seems that curiosity can be considered a basic need or drive to get to know one's environment, to improve the chances of survival. However, in this model, curiosity is seen as a way of seeking an optimum arousal level. You just need more of it. Okay, people with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, seem to seek stimulation for this reason. It increases dopamine levels almost as well as the drug Ritalin does. Although the pursuit of such stimulation, even by fidgeting, can be disruptive. That's why Ritalin, as opposed to just let them do whatever they can to get stimulated. It is not clear that the curiosity of scientists, though, serves to increase their physiological arousal. But the idea is that what we're seeing here is that we're looking for, some people need more arousal than others. For example, let's say you just get your driver's license, okay? Some people will choose to get a nice, comfortable sedan or Jeep, or some people may want to get their motorcycle. You would almost think the people who want to go pick up a gallon of milk from the grocery store and they ride their very fast motorcycle, those people may need a certain level of arousal more so than the people who go there in the sedan. All right. So curiosity, as with kids and these monkeys that we see here, may seek stimulation to reach an optimal arousal level. Now, a hunger for stimulation or novelty makes humans infovores, seekers of knowledge. And that's what we see with kids too. You know, the kids, once you answer one question and they say, well, why is that? You can expect probably 4 or 5 more whys as they get you to this why chain, because they want to know. They, much like the monkeys, are infovores. Now, so we have this idea of arousal level. Now let's talk a little bit about performance and arousal level. What happens when we succeed at raising our arousal level? So we want things going. To give you a little bit of better idea of what we mean by arousal levels, when you walk into your dorm room, your apartment, or your home, and it's dead silent, are you one of those individuals who has to turn something on immediately? Turn on the radio, the television, to get some sort of stimulation going on? That could be indication that you need a little bit more activity to feel comfortable, where some of you may turn stuff off to get comfortable. So we have these individual differences here of what your arousal level should be. But what happens when we succeed at raising our arousal levels? Well, there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Arousal levels can help performance, but too much arousal can interfere with performance. Okay? For taking an exam, usually a moderate arousal might be best. So let's look at this real quickly here. Below, we have the effect of arousal on performance depends on how comfortable we are with the task. So we see arousal at the bottom and performance level on the left here. And we see this blue curve And that blue curve represents you have a difficult task to do. This suggests that if you have a difficult task to do, you don't want too much arousal going on. You want to be able to focus on the task. You turn the television off, you turn the radio off, you turn the MP3 player off, you focus on what you need to do because it's a very difficult task for you. And so your arousal level needs to be low in order for you to perform best. Then we have the easy tasks. Sometimes easy tasks need to be surrounded by a little bit more arousal because you're not motivated, not energized enough. Okay, therefore you need a little bit more arousal to be able to comfortably be able to perform doing an easy task. I'm going to pause there, and I want to make sure you guys understand what this is saying. Do people get it? Okay, so the basic idea is that they're saying the level of arousal will motivate you so you can manage the level. Let me give you an example, and this deals with papers, by the way. When you get your first paper assignment at the beginning of the semester, it is a very, very, very rare student who starts working on that paper immediately. I mean, full force, working on that paper, being at the library for the 3 or 4 hours or whatever, or doing library research online 3 to 4 hours. That's a very rare person. What they do is they will wait until the deadline becomes closer and closer. What they're doing by doing that is they're sort of making the stress level or the arousal level become more significant, meaning that you want that test date or that paper assignment date to be only a little bit away. That motivates you more, gives you more energy to spend the X number of hours at the computer doing what it is that you need to do. Now, let me give another example about how this works. Now, if you're taking an exam, there may be some exam questions which will be easier, some exam questions which are going to be more difficult. But overall, you're going to get a moderate level of difficulty when it comes to the exam itself. So let's look at this next graph here. So this is normally they call the human performance curve. So when you are very, very calm, okay, there's less stress in the environment, you're not optimizing your performance. When there's so much stress in the environment and you're experiencing distress, your fatigue, exhaustion, all this type of stuff, you are not being able to perform at your best. Think about it this way. You sit down for a very, very important test, which many of you may be doing in the future, for example, a GRE or some other professional test. And if you are too calm, too laid back, you may not have the energy to really perform at your optimal level. But think about it. If you're so calm, you fall asleep, you're not going to perform well in that test. But if you're so stressed out because of that test that you can hardly stand still, you can hardly focus, neither will you perform well on that test. So this moderate level of stress, where you are, as they say here, energized, focused, and when you're in that zone, the work feels a little bit more effortless for you to do it, that's when we see performance work the best. So again, we see their level of stress or arousal level in your performance, it does have a relationship. Okay, ready to move on? Okay. Now, we've seen this a time or two already, and this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Abraham Maslow proposed that humans strive to ensure that basic needs are satisfied. Then they find motivation to pursue goals that are higher on this hierarchy. So at the very bottom, we have, again, our physiological needs. We need to satisfy them. And we need to satisfy them before we can see to our safety needs. Safety needs need to be satisfied before we can go focus on our belongingness and love needs and so on. Those belongingness needs need to be met before we can go look at our self-esteem needs. Self-esteem needs before self-actualization, and self-actualization before we go to self-transcendence. This is probably a new one for some of you. It's one other that's been added on. This is the need to find meaning and identity beyond the self. This is not about the self anymore. This is stuff beyond the self. You've moved beyond just all your self needs here. So what this tells us from Maslow's perspective is that these needs tend to have some degree of saying where we fall on this hierarchy. Most of us do not have to worry, for the most part, about physiological needs. Not in a country like ours, for the most part. Most of us, for the most part, don't have to worry about safety needs compared to other parts of the world where it's a very major concern. So a lot of the stuff that we worry about, that we sort of spend most of our days and time on, is going to be wanting to get love and be loved, to be accepted, avoid loneliness and separation. This is why social media is so powerful as it is today. And then we move on to the next one, the esteem needs. And so basically, this hierarchy, as Maslow proposed it, is the notion that we don't move up until we satisfy the lower level needs. Now, obviously, this is not necessarily the way it actually does work, because we do see people violate these needs all the time. For example, soldiers sacrifice their own safety, but could they be seen as fighting for safety, both indirectly protecting their country and directly by defeating the people who are shooting at them? So a soldier that throws themselves on top of a grenade, well, they're totally disallowing their own safety and their own livelihood and physiological needs there, but they're doing and performing a higher goal. And then you have people who have gone to hunger strikes. Uh, these hunger strikers and mystics feel secure enough in meeting their needs that they can do without food temporarily to pursue a higher goal. So we do see there are plenty of instances where the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are constantly being violated. Now let's look at more specifically at the motivation of hunger. So hunger, well, we'll be looking at body chemistry and brain control of hunger. We'll look at cultural and situational effects of hunger on hunger. Then we'll look at obesity, weight control challenges, physiology, social factors, food, and other activities as well. So, research on hunger is consistent with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy. In one study, men whose food intake had been cut in half became obsessed with food. Hunger even changes our motivations as we plan for the future. You've been in that situation too. Let's say we're having classes on campus and you did not eat the evening before, you did not have breakfast, you did not have lunch, and this is a late afternoon class. You're going to notice, because your mind is going to be in a totally different place. You're going to be noticing all the times people walk by the open classroom door with a cookout bag or Wendy's bag. You've probably been there before, where everything is food. You're smelling food. You're seeing people eating food. They're probably doing this stuff all the time, but now you're hungry. Now your personal motives have sort of shifted into a different gear. Now, let's look at the physiology of hunger. What's going on? Experiments and other investigations show a complex relationship among the stomach, hormones, and different parts of the brain. Feeling hungry can include stomach contractions. The feeling can happen even if the stomach has been removed or filled with a balloon. So what we see here, this individual swallowed a balloon which measures stomach contractions. All right. And this person is going to press each time he feels hungry. The stomach contractions and the hunger pangs are sort of correlated with one another. So we can see that this is one of those cues that tells us when we are hungry. That's when your stomach makes that noise, that may embarrass you to a degree, but it's just saying, I'm hungry. All right, we need something to eat. Now, what's going on in the body when this is occurring? Let's look back to a part of the brain that we discussed previously, the hypothalamus. Receptors in the digestive system, your guts, monitor levels of glucose or blood sugar and send signals to the hypothalamus in the brain. So the hypothalamus then can send out appetite stimulating hormones to tell the body time to eat. So it's measuring blood sugar going on in your digestive system. It's saying that it's not there, Okay, and then it tells the hypothalamus the situation, and then it sends out the hormone appetite stimulating hormones to the body, which is going to enhance your appetite. You're going to want to eat then. Now, the hypothalamus will send out these appetite stimulating hormones, and later, after eating, it will send out the appetite suppressing hormones. Hormones travel from the various organs to the body back to the brain to convey messages to decrease or increase one's appetite by releasing certain types of other substances. Now, again, we talked about this in the consciousness in the two-track mind, that there are certain substances, for example, in the drug marijuana, when you consume it, it's going to mess with the "I'm full" message getting to the brain. Because it messes with the I'm full message to the brain, you're going to always want to keep eating because your message about you being full just never gets there because that drug is blocking it. That's where you got the munchies coming from. All right, so the idea is all this type of stuff, what we're talking about now, as well as what we've talked about in previous chapters, are continually related. Make sure we keep making those connections across chapters. Now, regulating weight is a very difficult thing to do, and we'll see one of the reasons why it is so difficult in a few minutes here. But it is a difficult process. I too have gone through this various phases as well about trying to regulate weight. So when a person's weight drops or increases, the body responds by adjusting hunger and energy use to bring weight back to its initial stable amount. This is why regulating weight can be a very, very difficult thing, okay? Because your body has ways that it can respond to you trying to change your weight. One of the ways it can do it is to make you hunger and then slow down the way your body utilizes energy. So it's going to be more and more likely that you will gain weight that you don't want to gain or lose weight you don't want to lose. Most mammals, without consciously regulating, have a stable weight to which they keep returning. This is also known as their set point. So you don't have to do anything. The set point, and each one of us has our own set point that has already been established by our body. We don't consciously do it. It was done for us. The set point has been established. So a person's set point might rise with age or change with economic or cultural conditions. Therefore, this set point of stable weight is more of a current but temporary settling point. Okay, so once it's been established, the big challenge is going to be trying to change it. Trying to change it will be somewhat difficult to do because what will happen basically is this: as you try to lose weight, your body will say, no, no, you're going beneath the set point here. Therefore, what it will do is this: it will send out systems that will enhance your appetite so you're hungry, and then it will slow down your metabolism so that it gets rid of fat cells much less efficiently. Sounds really cruel, doesn't it? But that's what happens. All right. So regulating weight can be a very difficult thing because of the set point and because of what the body does to try to maintain stability. Now, let's talk about taste preferences real quickly here, and we'll get back to some of that weight stuff in a second. All right, taste preferences. We all have different tastes, okay? And we all were from different cultures or environments where food may be different as well. So some taste preferences are universal. The fun carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates temporarily raise levels of serotonin, reducing stress and depression. That's why when somebody's had a really difficult day or some major emotional stressor, they run to the carbohydrates because that's going to be one way for them to enhance their serotonin levels. It's as good as Prozac in that scenario, so that they feel better when they can start consuming them. Other tastes are acquired to become favorites through exposure, culture, and conditioning. So some of the foods that we also may enjoy eating, we had to learn to enjoy them. We might not have enjoyed them the first time we tasted them, but it is part of our culture. And so there are certain types of things that we do learn from our culture as to what to eat. For example, Different cultures encourage different types of food and different tastes. Some cultures find these foods to be delicious. Reindeer fat and berries or roasted guinea pig. Okay, and of course, being in the South, we have chitlins, which are pig guts. I think there's cow tongues, there's brains. What else is there? Uh, Pig's feet, chicken's feet. Anyone else have any other unique thing that they are aware of that may indicate a taste for certain foods that others may not find? Haggis. What is haggis, by the way?
It's sheep's stomach that's filled with like ground meat, food stuffing, and blood, and then it coagulates, and you steam it.
You had to say coagulate. I'm about ready to throw up here. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. But you see, that's what it comes down to. We see foods of all types different based on one's culture, where you grew up, what you're used to. Even spices can be determined to a large degree by where you grew up as well, which we'll see in this next slide. But there are all sorts of things. I remember coming home from school. I was in graduate school. I was coming home to visit my folks, and I walk into the door, and there's something bubbling on the stove and a big metal pot, the top on is bubbling, and I go up there and I lift it up, and there look like these bunches of hands in there. They're boiling chicken's feet, of all things. I've never seen that before. I wish to forget that, but I can't. So we do see in particular areas of the country where there may be certain types of foods that are indicative of that particular culture, the people that live there. Now, differences in taste preferences are not arbitrary. Personal and cultural experience influenced by biology play a role as well. We can acquire a food aversion after just one incident of getting sick after tasting food. It is an adaptive in warm climates to develop a taste for salt and spice, which preserve food. So what it comes down to, if you live or grew up in a very warm climate, it is often that you will have more spices in your food, more spices, particularly salt, for example. In warmer climates, you'll see salt being utilized more because in order for food from a long time ago, when we didn't have refrigerators and freezers, from a long time ago, how did we able to preserve food so we could eat it during the warmer months because we didn't have refrigeration? We'd kill that pig a long time ago and we'd salt the meat so that we would have the ability to eat it without getting sick. But the meat was salted. Again, country ham. That's what we see. Then the other types of things too, depending on how warm the climate is, we tend to see a lot more spices. These spices have been shown to kill little small bugs and virus and other agents that we don't see with the naked eye, so that the people, the population, would be healthier. So there's a reason why all the spices, okay? So it helps to preserve food and also to maintain our health. So disliking new tastes or neophobia may have helped to protect our ancestors. So what it comes down to is that you always want to be a little bit cautious when new food is being presented until you know how that new food is going to interact with you. So we're always going to be sort of like ready to say, no, I don't want it. Okay. Or if you do get sick after you eat it, you will develop that taste aversion that we talked about previously. So these things are very important to our biology and our evolution. It's not just preferences. They're around too because they help us to live. They help us to survive and to become the people that we are today. Now, how much do we eat? Eating depends in part on situational influences. I imagine once the pandemic is over and people start going out on a regular basis and buffets and things like that return, people are going to go crazy. But it does depend in part on social influences, how much we eat. So we have first social facilitation, which we'll see more of in the upcoming chapter on social psychology. Social facilitation, the presence of others accentuates our typical eating habits. What that means is this: if you tend to eat a little bit less than normal when you get around people, you'll eat even less. If you tend to eat a little bit more than normal, if you get around people, you'll eat even more. So it accentuates whatever our typical eating habits are. So that's one way that we are sort of influenced by situational influences. Then we have the unit bias. We may eat only one serving, unit, or scoop, plateful, bunful of food, but we'll eat more if the serving size is larger. So the idea here is that by we upsizing all things, it's sort of like trying to make us want to eat more by supersizing our meals. And then we have what we refer to as the buffet effect. This is not an official term, by the way. It's something that the author of this textbook came up with. We eat more if more options are available. Think about that. How a buffet, what we used to call a smorgasbord, or a buffet, when you go to a buffet, you have all these choices. Let me ask you out there now, when you remember going to a buffet from a long time ago, at least a year plus probably, do you tend to eat more at a buffet or not? Yes or no? I eat more at a buffet, and my response would be a definite yes. When I do have a buffet, it would be a yes that I tend to eat more. So we see this type of stuff, and it just tells us that our behavior, the things that motivate our eating behavior, are not always the things which are clearly in front of us. Now, why is this? All right. It can be explained in evolutionary terms. Think about it this way. Our ancestors stored fat and nutrients during bountiful times. So when there was a lot of stuff out there, they would eat and eat and eat. Okay. When more variety was available, they would just eat bountiful times. And they would store fat cells. The fat cells were there for a reason. Fat cells are there for the famine. So because it wasn't like you could go to the corner grocery store, if the animals, there was a drought and the animals went away, and something happened, and the food didn't go quite right, whatever crops and berries you used to pick, and people were starting to starve, the people who had fat cells, lots of fat cells, are the ones who survived. The ones who did not have fat cells, they died. So fat cells were something that allowed us to live. Therefore, we, their descendants, have inherited the capability of producing all these fat cells. The problem is, the way ours, and knock on wood here, we don't go through famines here. We don't go through famines where we don't have enough to eat. Not like we're talking about back in the day of famines. Therefore, we have these fat cells. A famine never shows up, and so we never use these fat cells. And therefore, we have to do things to try to control our weight. But it was very, very much a survival thing back in the day that we needed these fat cells to survive. So the skinny folks back in the day, they died off. They didn't have enough fat cells to survive. Therefore, our ancestors, the ones that had the sufficient fat cells, those characteristics have been passed down the line to generation till we have a bunch of people here that have sufficient fat cells. And once they're there, we have something to do with them. We either have a famine or we got to start exercising, unfortunately. Okay. Any questions or comments there before we move on? All right. So what we've seen then, by looking at all of this, we have seen the following. There are greatly complicated motivations can be, when it comes to our eating behavior, very complicated, complex. Okay, it can be in how we've involved with the eating things. These things also can evolve into eating disorders, which we'll see a few chapters from now when we look at psychological disorders. But eating behavior can become a very problematic thing for many people. And one of the things which is very unfortunate is that when it comes to certain disorders, particularly disorders where you have to do the behavior, because people have to eat to survive. So having an eating disorder on top of that can be very problematic. Now, for example, people may have an addiction to smoking or nicotine, but you don't need nicotine to survive. You don't need to smoke to survive, but you need to eat. So that's a sort of a different connotation about the influences there. Now, let's look real quickly at some of the influences on eating behavior. Biologically speaking, we have the hypothalamic centers and brain monitoring appetite hormones, stomach pains, weight set, the settling point. Psychological factors, sight and smell of foods, variety of food, stress and mood, food unit size, all have an influence on our eating behavior. And then the social cultural influences, cultural learned taste preferences for that haggis, or chitlins or pig feet, and responses to cultural preferences for appearance of food as well. So all these things are complicated, and they all have some influence on our eating behavior, even to the amount of people who are around us when we are eating. All right. So let's look now at weight control and obesity, looking at hunger. Do we need to control our hunger? When we eat, excuse me, when we eat enough to gain weight, we can face discrimination, bullying, and depression. Standards for body size can vary in different cultures, sometimes creating an unhealthy norm of being overweight or underweight. And you should understand too, even in this country, many decades ago, it was deemed to be more attractive to have a little bit more weight on the body because that usually was a sign of affluence and health, as opposed to what we see when fashion became the mode of the day. Because of fashion, we see that now the models are much skinnier and things of that nature. Even though I see there's a push now to have more normal sized or plus size individuals be models as well. But we can see, as models became more popular in the media, magazines, then the idea of what was attractive did tend to change. And again, it does vary from culture to culture. In some cultures, someone who is considered to be skinny here would not be seen as attractive at all. Body fat has been seen as a sign of affluence and thus has been considered attractive, as I was stating. But a certain ratio of weight to height does provide some health risks that I'm sure most people are familiar with by now. So the physiology of obesity, having some body fat is normal, and a healthy fat stores energy. As I was describing what the whole body fat thing was about, it was about survival a long time ago. Uh, Being mildly overweight is not necessarily a problem if the person is in good physical condition or exercising. Obesity can lead to health problems, including diabetes, heart disease, cognitive decline, as well as some cancers. The physiology of obesity can also make it hard to lose weight due to the set point metabolism, genetics, appetite, and lifestyle factors. So, what it comes down to is that there are going to be a variety of things that are going to be combating you to try to make you not lose that weight or gain that weight. Okay, obesity and losing weight is not just an issue of motivation. Now, let's talk about that set point a little bit more closely here. So, for a variety of reasons, a person's set point, this again is the stable weight the body keeps returning to, drifts from a healthy weight. So, you be in a healthy weight, as long as the health weight and your set point are the same, it's all good. But once that set point drifts away from what is considered a healthy weight for that individual, then we have some problems. Those who become overweight develop a new set of set point that is now hard to shift from. And that's where the challenge of dieting comes in, because what you're really trying to do is shift away from that new set point that has been established. And why is this? Well, once the set point has shifted, your metabolism shifts to maintain it. So once the set point has been established and shifted to an unhealthy weight, your metabolism goes along for the ride. It says, okay, we'll work with your now set point. We'll try to make sure that we're maintaining this particular set point. So your resting metabolism slows. So the idea is that your metabolism is like you eat a donut, and your metabolism, if it's a fast metabolism, it'll get rid of that donut before your class is over. But if it's really slow metabolism, it'll hang on to it because it's working really, really slow. It's more likely to turn into some fat. All right. So once the set point has shifted, metabolism shifts to maintain it, and the resting metabolism slows, which is going to make it very, very difficult for you to lose weight. Starving to lose weight slows metabolism even further. So if you start to starve yourself, they're not eating. This is wrong. This is going to make us lose some weight. We don't want that. So they turn the metabolism down even more. So that donut that you ate stays with you longer and longer so it can turn into some fat cells. Hunger kicks in when weight goes below the new set point. Up, it's below the set point now. Let's make this person really hungry. So, yes, you may have thought about it before, but when you're trying to lose weight, your body is fighting you tooth and nail. It's pulling all sorts of dirty tricks on you by making you hungrier, by slowing your metabolism down, because it is set on that set point, being the stable weight for you. And you have to sort of kick it in the butt to try to make it shift away from that set point where it is at an unhealthy weight. And that is where the challenge comes in. Because the body works this way, it is thus easier to stay lean than to become lean, because the body will fight you in this very tricky way. Now, we have seen some other things too when it comes to obesity, the genetics of obesity. Adopted siblings eating the same meals end up with a BMI weight resembling their biological parents, not people in the same household. So that tends to suggest a genetic backup there as well. Identical twins have similar weights even when raised apart with different food. There seems to be many genes with effects on weight. So there's not one fat gene, so to speak, and there's several things that seem to be at play that will determine rates of obesity, for example. Now, lifestyle factors in obesity, we see people who are restless and fidgety burn off more calories and gain less weight than others. Inadequate sleep, and this is one of the things too, which is going to be a problem for many people over my years of teaching, because the people say they do have some sleep issues. If they're having weight issues too, this is probably most likely the cause. Inadequate sleep causes weight gain despite increased active time because of appetite hormones. Okay, because again, it's hard for us to fight the hormones too. The hormones that tell us to eat, okay, because you're up at 1 o'clock in the morning doing some stuff. You may be active and fidgety and all this other stuff, but more than likely, those hormones are going to be released. Go ahead and let's have a cheeseburger or whatever. Having an obese friend correlates with becoming obese as well. Sedentary lifestyles and fast food may be leading to increased body fat worldwide. I haven't seen anything, but I suspect there's probably some articles out there right now about how this pandemic and this lockdown been going on now for over a year, how that has changed the American diet or the world diet, and how that has changed people's weight. I'm one that's suffering as well. So the idea here is that these things will have a great deal of influence on us. Now, overall, and this is well before the pandemic here, but let's see what the world was looking like. So the prevalence of obesity, rates of being overweight. So we can look here and see who's number one. That's us. And this is somewhat old data, but I would suspect that it's probably around the same. We are one of the largest, more overweight nations in the world, followed by England and then Australia. And all these cultures have a great deal of similarity to them. They're individualistic cultures. They are first world cultures and all this type of stuff and everything. So we see that this is an issue that we have not only in our societies, but also in other societies as well. And you can determine where you're supposed to be with your height up here and then your weight and whether or not you found into obese, overweight, or healthy category. I suggest you not do that now. I know I've done it. I have not liked the results in years. So don't do it for yourself unless you feel confident you'll wind up in the healthy or underweight category. So the BMI, known as the body mass index, if it's over 30, that's when they classify you as being obese. 1 billion people worldwide are overweight. 300 million are obese, according to this particular research taken some time ago. Okay. All right. So obesity and weight control. How does obesity develop and why is it hard to change? All right. First, It was adaptive for our ancestors to crave energy-rich food when available, because again, we wanted to be able to have that stuff available to us stored so that when we needed it, we had it. The problem, though, is that this energy-rich junk food is now easily available and cheaper than healthy food. So we ate the junk food our ancestors did when it was available. This is quote junk, so stuff that was high energy, okay, when it was available, which was a rarity. But now we go around every corner, there's going to be some junk food available to us. And again, the amazing thing, it is cheaper to eat junk food and food that's not good for you compared to eating more healthily, because healthy food costs more. It is adapted to slow down our burning of fat when food is scarce. All right, the problem is in poverty or in crash diets, our body can slow down weight loss. So our body metabolism, as we were saying earlier, it slows the process down. So it is very, very difficult to get out of the trap, so to speak, about trying to lose the weight. There's so many factors against you. And one of the big ones, though, is going to be, believe it or not, socioeconomic status, one's wealth. They've done some research, too, that even indicates grocery stores are different. A grocery store in a more socioeconomically stable and higher level SES neighborhood will offer a lot more healthy choices than you will see at a neighborhood grocery store in a lower SES, socioeconomic status. So we see there are a variety of factors that go on that are going to promote certain types of weight advantages or weight disadvantages to certain parts of the population. So losing weight, the challenge, because of the physiological factors and perhaps due to lifestyle and peer issues, once obese, weight loss is difficult, and permanent weight loss is even harder to maintain. Obsessive weight loss attempts to add to shame, anxiety, depression, and disordered eating habits such as bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, which we'll see a little bit later in the course. And the losing weight, the plan. If you decide to move your body's set point to a lower body weight, you begin with an understanding of the metabolic challenges you face so that you blame slow progress on physiology, not poor willpower. I mean, to be honest with you, when you are going to be craving that snack once you started that diet, yeah, it might be a little bit of willpower, but it's going to be a lot of your body releasing the hormones that says eat. Okay, and we are going to try to obey our hormones, but we have to get past that. Begin with self-acceptance and decision to change rather than feeling shame. Make gradual and consistent, not drastic changes in varying your lifestyle. And that's one of the key things too. Don't try to go jog immediately 5 miles. Just walk for a few. Okay, increase exercise and healthy food choices, and of course, get support. Join a club, whatever type of group you can, in order to do those types of things together, because the social support does help a great deal as well. Now, theories of motivation, motivation to belong, another key factor that we see in our particular society. Uh, what do people need besides food and sex? Aristotle, social life. Alfred Adler, community. In Middle English, to be wretched was reke, which means to be without kin nearby. And Roy Baumeister, Mark Leary, and Abraham Maslow says we need to belong. Belonging, being connected to others, part of a group or family community, is a very, very powerful thing in our society. Why do we need to belong, and why do we have these characteristics that we inherited from our ancestors? It's because of this. Evolutionary psychology perspective, seeking bonds with others aids survival in many ways. Keeping children too close to caregivers, mutual protection in a group, cooperation in hunting and sharing food, division of labor to allowing growing food, emotional support to get through crisis. All of these things our ancestors did because they were connected to, they belonged to a group, a kin or family unit, extended family unit, and allowed them to survive. And because of that, we inherited those same needs that they had as well. So balancing bonding with other needs. We have the need to bond with others is so strong that we can feel lost without close relationships. However, we also seem to need autonomy, be able to stand on our own, a sense of personal competence and the efficacy of being able to accomplish tasks, the tension between me and us, but these goals can work together. Belonging builds self-esteem and prepares us for a confident autonomy. So we want to be able to build relationships and kinship with others, but also be able to walk on our own. So that's the sort of balance that we try to achieve. Now, the need to belong leads to loyalty to friends, teams, groups, and families. However, the need to belong also leads to changing our appearance to win acceptance, and we'll see this in the upcoming chapter as well. Staying in abusive relationships, joining gangs, nationalist groups, and violent organizations even. So our need to belong is not always going to be a positive thing. We see this happening today in our political and social environment as well. People will join all sorts of groups with all sorts of different types of motives and aims. But this is what we do. We need to belong. That's part of our DNA in a sense. So disruptive bonds and new beginnings. What we might hear, children repeatedly moved away from primary caretakers in childhood, may have difficulty forming deep attachments like the secure and insecure attachment that we saw when we were children, and how they may have an impact in adulthood. People losing a loved one or moving away from a hometown can feel grief. And then this other one that I want to focus here, being ostracized. This is, or being shunned, cut off from social contact or excluded can lead to real physical pain. Now, we talked about relational aggression in the previous chapter, where someone tries to hurt your relationships and your bonds with others. If someone spreads some bad gossip about an individual, and then all of a sudden all her friends are cutting her off, she's been ostracized, okay? And her relationship has been hindered a great deal. The research shows that this can lead to real physical pain in that person, such that taking Tylenol helps because they feel the pain. So social connections are so important that when they have been cut through being ostracized, we feel not only the emotional, but the psychological and the physical pain as well. And yet people can find resilience and relief from pain by building more social connections. Now, social network and social connection. Do updates and tweets build connection? Use of social networking can become a compulsion, sacrificing face-to-face interaction and in-depth conversation. During this era of the pandemic, it's probably been somewhat more helpful, actually. Research shows that portrayal of one's self online is often close to one's actual sense of self. So people are not lying like a lot of people really think. They may be exaggerating in some areas, but usually it is close to who they really are. Research shows online social networking is associated with the following: narcissism or self-centeredness, a less connection to one's actual neighbors, more connection to people who share our narrow interests and viewpoints. We will see more on this a little bit later, but this becomes a very dangerous thing, is that when we talk about people online, they usually go to sites and viewpoints which is already the same viewpoints they already hold, and they usually become more extreme. Okay, this is called polarization, and we'll talk more about that in an upcoming chapter. But more connection to people who share our narrow interests and viewpoints sort of expands, okay, and we become more polarized as a result of that as well. So this last thing we want to talk about is the need for achievement. The need for achievement. What is our motivation to do well in our jobs? Is it just the desire to belong and gaining income to meet the basic needs? Humans in many cultures seem to have an achievement motivation, which is a desire for accomplishment of a goals, mastery of skills, meeting of standards, control of resources. What helps us satisfy our achievement motivation? We have discipline, sticking to a task despite distractions, the 10-year rule, having enough experience to develop expertise in a field, grit, passionate persistence at a goal, and hardiness, resilience under stress, discipline, having enough expertise at doing things, developing a sense of grit, and hardiness all leads to having us to be able to achieve and motivate ourselves in work and have this high need for achievement. High need for achievement can reveal itself in a variety of ways. One story, real quickly, is you give a group of people a task, and the task, unbeknownst to them, is unsolvable. And what they were able to learn is people who had a low need for achievement, they would stop the task almost immediately, whereas the people who had a high need for achievement, they worked on that task, which was unsolvable, much longer. Okay, they eventually would stop, but the idea is that they need to beat it. They need to win it. So let's do a real quick review of what we've covered so far at these motives. We looked at arousal theory, arousal optimization theory, about how levels of stress and arousal can be related to performance. We looked at hierarchy of needs from Maslow's perspective about how we need to meet the basic needs before we meet the higher order needs. And of course, we covered drive reduction theory, looking at the physiological needs of like food and water and how it causes a certain uncomfortableness in us that we need to do behaviors to take care of those drives, which also will also lead to reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And finally, we looked at other motives such as need for achievement, need for affiliation, and we didn't mention this, but there's also a need for power. Need for power is basically says that you need to be able to influence the behavior of others. And so all this type of things will determine what your motives will be. If you have a need for achievement, you're going to be good in academics and most likely probably good at certain types of tasks in your employment. Need for affiliation. You want to have relationships with people. And again, the relationships may be important to you. Say, I want to work in an environment where there's a lot of people so you can have relationships with them. And need for power is that more likely these individuals who have a need for power, they want to be able to influence behavior of others. That means they're more likely to be motivated to try to be the team leader, the supervisor, or the manager. So that takes us to where we need to go for today, and that's wrapping it up today. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, I'm planning on having a little session with my other general psych class too. And when I do that, I'll let you guys know about it. It'll just do a little bit of things from our first part of the course and anything dealing with the current event paper that you guys might want to ask. So I'll be assured to include you in the invite once I do that. All right, if there's nothing else, you guys are free to skedat. You guys have a nice Wednesday, and I'll see you later.